Hello, yes, can people please sit down while I introduce the meeting? Hello, as Mayor, I would like to welcome everybody to this meeting. I'm Councillor Stephen Hodgson. This is the public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making audio recording and providing commentary on the proceedings. Please note, this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the web meeting page of the Council website. By using the form of the meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Next, I would like to welcome you all to the meeting. Everybody to observe a minute's silence to commemorate the life of two former city councillors, Clifford Lord and Margaret Clutterbuck, who both sadly passed away recently. Cliff Lord died at a retirement home on the Mumbles, where he moved to live near his daughter. The son of a railwayman, born in Lydney, Cliff first came to Worcester at the age of 6. He was educated here and went on to have a long career in industry. He spent 50 years living in Elizabeth Avenue, Claims, with his wife Muriel, who sadly passed away in 2019. He worked at the Royal Ordnance at Blackpool, where he was apprentice, and then spent most of his life at H.W. Ward. He was a councillor for St Martin's Ward between 1950 and 1955, and after taking early retirement, he rejoined the council in 1984, representing Holy Trinity Ward. He served as chair of the Contract Services Board and the Technical Services Committee, and was mayor in 1987-88. He retired as a councillor in 1996 and was made an honorary alderman in 2016. An excellent public speaker, Cliff led the campaign for comprehensive education in the 1970s and served as chair of governors of Purviswell and Warden Primary School. As a long-standing member of the Labour Party, he acted as chair, branch secretary and agent in general elections. He also served as a trustee of Worcester Municipal Charities for many years. In his retirement, both Cliff and Muriel were active members of Worcester Twinning Association, and Cliff became their life president. There will be a commemoration service at Arete Crematorium at 1 p.m. on Wednesday, the 22nd of September this year. The service will be webcast. Should anybody be interested. Margaret Clifford after a Sandfield nursing home on the 28th of August 2021, aged 92. Margaret was a councillor for the St Clement Ward for 4 years between 1995 and 1991. The funeral service will be held at Bromyard Road Methodist Church on Thursday, the 23rd of September at 11:45 a.m, followed by a cremation at Worcester Crematorium. We now stand and will take the minute silence. Thank you very much. If we remain standing, I will now welcome the Reverend Rosie Moss to offer prayers.
It's the time of year when harvest is traditionally celebrated, yet the news is full of warnings about food and fuel shortages. When we hear such things, it's easy to forget how much we have. I'd like to share this Celtic poem to give some perspective. Remember the poor when we look out on the fields we own and our cows roaming. Remember the poor when we look into our barns at the abundance of our harvest. Remember the poor when the wind howls and the rain falls as we sit warm and dry in our houses. Remember the poor when we eat fine food and drink fine ale at our fine carved tables. The cows have grass to eat. The rabbits have burrows for shelter. The birds have warm nests. But the poor have no food except what we feed them. No shelter except our houses when we welcome them. No warmth except our glowing fires. So as we begin this meeting, help us to engage in meaningful discussion. Allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of community. And continue to remind us that all we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the service of humanity.
Thank you very much. You may now be seated. Okay. Are there any apologies for absence?
Councillor Olkoff and Councillor Griffiths, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Can I have any declarations of interest? There aren't any. In that case then, can we agree that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 13th of July 2021 are a true and accurate record? Thank you very much. The next item is Mayor's communication. I was just going to straighten this change for a minute. It had the mind of its own, I'm afraid. Okay, that's great. Okay then. Okay, any of you who were in the Guildhall last Friday, I held my inaugural banquet, which I think you'll agree we all had a wonderful time. A special thanks to the police and the Guildhall team for their hard work in making the event such a memorable success. I'd also like to pay tribute as well to the caterers, Four Seasons, who put on an excellent meal that I've received quite a few compliments how much they enjoyed the food and that. And yeah, that was a really good night, and I'm so proud. And also the floral decorations by the were absolutely fantastic. Last week, I was also pleased, along with my mayoress, to go to the City Art Gallery Museum to see the Titanic and Honour and Glory exhibition. That's been a really success. About 20,000 visitors have actually come across, including many of Leeds and Turkey. I've been to Titanic Belfast, and I've been to the Titanic Museum in Southampton. So there are a few of these exhibitions around the country, so they are worth doing. And next year, I'm hoping to get to the one in Cork. So that's really good. And then future events. On the 2nd of October, we've got our Charter Civic event, which is a really special event, which we'll hear about more in a few minutes. On the 10th of October, I've got my civic service, so keep that date in your diary. And of course, on the 14th of November, we will be commemorating Remembrance Sunday. A reminder that a photograph has been taken. So when the business meeting is concluded, we will go downstairs to the courtroom, where we will robe up for the photograph which will be taken upstairs in the assembly room. You'll be able to have some liquid refreshment between the time while the photographer is setting it up and that. And then once we've taken this photograph, you're all cordially invited to a buffet supper, which will be held in the lower hall. So I hope you all look forward to that. Now, my next item to talk about is the 400th anniversary of the Charter. The Charter being the first that incorporated the city and established it there. This is widely recognised as creating the city of Worcester. Any of you who have been on Paul Harding's walk will have learned quite a lot of this, so apologies if you already know some of this now. Local organisations have been invited to get involved and participate in a Charter Day, which is going to be celebrated on the 2nd of October in the Guildhall. Key activities of these will include, we've got the Charter merchandise, the pin badges and the tote bags, which you've probably seen around, and I recommend you get yours while stocks last. We've got bespoke charter tours delivered by Discover History, which many of us have already experienced. 3 events were held during the Three Choirs Festival, which were specifically linked to the Charter celebration. There was also a themed charter classes at the Worcester Show back in August. And with the festival, there was a third humorous play looking at the main events in Worcester over the past 400 years. This was performed during the festival in August and will be performed again as part of Charter Day celebration. We're also going to have the installation of the Edmund Hurden blue plaque, which you can see on the table in front of you there. And also have the commissioning of these 2 Wentworth pewter bowls, which are also on the table down there. So when you've got a moment after the meeting, I suggest you have a little look at them. We're also commissioning 3 unique artwork, a tapestry, an enamel hanging sculpture, and a large infographic timeline of the past 400 years. The celebration on the 22nd of October will include 3 plays, an exhibition of royal charters, the play, the reading of the Charter, stands with local history and heritage society, and work by local school children. Alternatively, there'll be walking tours of key sites and a chance to sample specially commissioned Charter ale, which I'm looking forward to. A civic event will include the opportunity for all past mayors to be officially photographed to mark the occasion. Worcester Cathedral are hosting an organ recital in the evening, performed by the organist of St Paul's Cathedral, Simon Johnson, and will include music from Thomas Tompkins, who was organist of Worcester Cathedral at the time of signing the Charter. Wider engagement includes the new St Peter's Heritage Trail, which has highlighted points of interest from the early 1600s to the present day. A partnership with Know Your Place and Worcester Bid, which has enabled the creation of a Charter Trail posters for local businesses in the city centre and are based in buildings connected with the founding members. And Perrywood School are delivering a range of activities related directly to the Charter on the 1st of October that will involve the entire school. The University of Worcester are delivering a series of lectures on the 9th of October on different themes ranging across the 4th century, and 400 broadleaf saplings, location to be confirmed, will be planted. Other activities include a Charter essay competition, commissioning a video photographer for an end-of-year commemoration film, and linking the Victorian Fair opening ceremony and the Twinning Association, who are working with the Twinning booklet of photos through the ages. Activities are being promoted by the website, in City Life, and on social media, and in press releases. Finally, all members are invited to discover Charter tours, which we've done, so we know how the city was governed, the privileges it received, and understand what the Charter means. Now I'll hand you over to Councillor Adrian Gregson, who has worked with the Charter 400 Working Group to tell you more about the history of the Charter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The 1621 James I Charter is of special importance as it establishes the mayor and creates Worcester as a county of itself. This was the final step in giving Worcester independent governance, which lasted through pretty much until 1974. The 1621 Charter was preceded by 18 others, dating back to 1189. And Richard the Lionheart, who in return for money for his second crusade, gave certain freedoms to Worcester's merchants. And this charter implied that some system of governance had already existed, and it is believed that Edward the Confessor granted the first to Bishop Woolston in 1042. Henry I created a constable on his visit to Worcester in 1128, and various deeds came from Henry II. Henry III, in his charter of 1227, confirms the existence of the Common Council, established a guild merchant, and clearly enunciated the governance of the town with officials, particularly the bailiffs. Now, other charters and confirmations of freedoms and dues follow, but by 1466, Worcester was governed by a close mix of the council, made up of two chambers of the 24 and the 48, and the Merchant Guild and the Trinity Guild as a sort of social and charitable arm of government. So we had law and order, the economy, and public welfare, not much different from today. The push for a new charter began in 1553, following the trend in other towns for mayors and greater independence, especially from the church and the state, personified by the county sheriff. This Philip and Mary Charter of 1555 provided for a recorder and a town clerk, and it also established the bailiffs as justices. It formalised courts, it reset markets and fairs, and it gave 2 MPs. The only real development on previous charters was to allow the corporation to hold land and to acquire the goods of orphans that had previously gone to the Crown. So this dissatisfaction created another committee, and they petitioned for a mayor and county status, which had not been granted in 1555. And in 1594, that committee was led by Thomas Colley. Their aim was to incorporate the mayor, aldermen, bailiffs, and citizens independent of the county. And arguing and bargaining eventually resulted in the Charter of 1616. This is a little-known charter. It hasn't survived other than in the text of the pipe rolls at the National Archives, but it is referred to in the Chamber Order books of April 1616. This too was insufficient, and so by a close vote of 24 to 25, I hope you're keeping up with the numbers on the 24 and the 48, the council agreed in 1621 to pursue their long-term aim, and eventually this was successful. I think Mayor are broadly familiar with the content of that charter by now. If not, there is a transcription available, all 24 pages of it, and there is a film also to watch of His Honour the Judge Burbage reading it all out at length. I want to touch just on some of the people who governed the city of 1,000 people in 1621. The key figure is clearly Edward Herdman himself, who ironically had married Thomas Colley's widow, Joan, in 1595. Herdman came from Kemsey, a second son of Thomas. His wife had died before he moved to Worcester, which was presumably in the 1590s, but he had a son, George. After marrying Joan, he joined the 48 in 1602 and subsequently the 24. And we know he lived in Butter Slip in the Quay, and then later at the bottom of Broad Street. By 1619, he is a bailiff, and one of the 24, 1620 is the alderman, and as we know, 1621, he was elected mayor. His grandson, William, moved to Turley, which is near Tewkesbury. And there is a plaque in Turley Church to William's son, dated 1727, which refers directly back to Edward as being his grandfather and the first mayor of Worcester. His stepdaughter, who is one of Joan's daughters, married Thomas Lysons, or License, a name familiar to many of us, who was mayor in 1651. He was rather unfortunately imprisoned at the Fleet in London because it was his turn to declare Charles II as king before the end of all the civil wars. Being mayor was not always popular, not least because it meant paying for it. And the Chamber in July 1621 actually agreed that as so many of the 24 had already been bailiffs or officers, that they shall not be charged with the office of mayor unless they consent to it. In fact, Herdman was an excellent choice of being high bailiff. And usually, after 1621, the sheriff became the mayor the following year, and the mayor went on to be the ancient alderman. And of those 24 named in 1621, we have wills surviving for 23 of them. These will be subject to an exhibition at the Hive in October. Interestingly, Herdman was the only one of that group to become mayor, though a number of their sons or nephews did go on to office. But 3 members of the 48 listed in 1621 did go on to become mayor and then eventually aldermen. Council members themselves were obliged to attend the chamber and would be fined for not doing so. To resign cost £100. But they also very clearly represented an oligarchy of interest, particularly associated with the pot industry and, not surprisingly, brewing. Officers, of course, were important, the town clerk especially, as now, constables in each of the 7 wards, gatekeepers, and the sword bearer, who was soon to also become responsible for the fish market, presumably due to the length of his sword and salmons. We even know what they wore. In fact, where they were obliged to wear their livery gowns on formal occasions and funerals. And we know that the bailiffs wore scarlet, a tradition handed on to the mayor from 1621, while the 24 wore gowns of murrey and ingrain, from at least the 1500s, because we know they're described as such even before Elizabeth's visit in 1575. So when you go downstairs to don your dual robes of murrey and livery for the photograph, spare a thought for the many who passed through here over the last 500 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been informed there won't be any public participation in this meeting. So the next item is item 6, which will be the questions to the council. Now, this is obviously quite a busy schedule tonight, and we're having our photograph done. I think it's coming about 9 o'clock. I know we've had some long speeches so far, barely necessarily with the charter, but if I can ask questions to keep their supplementary short and to the point. And I will say the same as well for those replying to questions as well. So the first one is from Councillor Mel Olkoff, Councillor Mel Olkoff, leader of the council. Can I have the microphone on, please? Oh.
There we go. Is it on now? Yes. There we go. Woo. Hedgehog numbers have seen a sharp decline due to habitat loss and fragmentation, with modern housing developments being built with impenetrable fences that interrupt the movement of hedgehogs in their quest to find food. As one of the few wild animals that happily choose to live alongside us and enjoy our garden habitats, and wording in part 4 of section D in the South Worcestershire Development Plan, Policy 26, can we please show our support for these very special creatures by ensuring that hedgehog highways are included in all new developments, no matter what their size? And can we also promote the retrofitting of holes in existing boundaries to Worcester residents, which can be incorporated at very little cost to help the hedgehogs in our city? Thank you, Mayor.
Very much. Councillor Mark Bayliss to reply to the question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, colleagues. And thank you to Councillor Lewin for the question. As part of the suite of green infrastructure related policies in the SWDP review, emerging policy number 26, biodiversity and geodiversity, expects all developments to deliver measurable net gains in biodiversity. Enhancements for wildlife within the built environment will be sought where appropriate from all scales of development. The level of net gain required will be proportionate to the type, scale and impact of the development. The Joint Advisory Panel of members steering the SWDP review has considered this policy, and it will be submitted to the Place and Economic Development Committee as part of the package of SWDP policies for approval prior to public consultation next year under the Regulation 19 process. In addition, the forthcoming Environment Bill sets out the government's agenda for environmental reform, and it is anticipated that a mandatory percentage of biodiversity net gain will become law once the bill receives royal assent. A range of biodiversity measuring tools are currently being produced to complete the environmental to complement the environmental bill in order to help local authorities measure biodiversity net gain in planning applications. On similar schemes, meeting net gain requirements could be achieved through the provision of a bird box or through the creation of hedgehog capitals. Providing greater habitat connectivity is certainly one avenue towards the achievement of biodiversity net gain in development.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor?
Thank you, Councillor Bowes, for your response. My concern is that every time we get a planning application at the moment, we cannot say to a contractor and developer that they should do it now. And the problem is that every single development that goes up is another barrier to in the future. We have seen that hedgehogs are on a massive decline, so time is really important. And every season that hedgehogs are not increasing or even maintaining their level is a problem. They are an indicator species. They actually tell us about the quality and health of our environment. And it's not just hedgehogs that will benefit from the connectivity between houses. You get frogs and other invertebrates that will also benefit. So really what I'd like to do is really promote not only future developments, but also existing ones, because in the city centre, we're not getting much development. And actually that's where we also need to help the hedgehogs.
I don't think I heard a question in that, Mr. Mayor, but I understand that the member was making a point, and I think it's a very fair one. Planning is a very highly regulated sector, and our powers in terms of development have to be guided by the legislative and regulatory frameworks on which we operate, including obviously the adopted local plan. So I can't offer her any immediate fixes to it, but I hope she accepts that we recognise the importance of biodiversity, and I'm sure across the council we will try and build that into our plans and implement those as quickly as we can.
Okay, the second question is from Councillor Richard, Councillor Andy Stafford, Chair of the Environmental Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I asked the question as on the order paper.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stafford.
Thank you for your question. In short, the answer is that it depends on the specific situation and the decision being made.
Won't surprise you, Mr. Mayor, but I have a supplementary. St. John's Cemetery has over 9,000 graves and is still operational. Many people visit it on a regular basis, and it has still got many years. Before it reaches capacity. Will we consult with both employees, users and visitors of the cemetery to consider ways in which our provision of services could be improved, including the reopening of the toilets? Will he reconsider his decision, taken in private and without consultation, not to support any investment in St. John's Cemetery? And will he allow a report to go to the committee to consider the costs, options and solutions to this problem?
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Okay.
Under the Constitution, questions, supplementary questions must directly relate to the question, the primary question. I don't believe that such a long and convoluted question about a detailed subject is in order, and I'd ask you to seek guidance on that, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, my advice would be that the purposes of a published question is to give everybody notice of the subject matter of that question, and it must follow that the supplemental follows from the published notice of the question. So I can agree with the point of order. It wouldn't have been possible from the overarching question to anticipate what the supplemental question would be. Obviously, it's a matter for the chair of the committee to decide how and if he wishes to respond to that.
Okay, Councillor Stafford, do you wish to reply to this question?
Given that Councillor Udall had ample opportunity to put in an appropriate question, I'm happy to abide by the decision of the educating officer.
Okay then, in that case, then we'll move on to the third question, please. Councillor Usel again.
Mr. Mayor, on a point of order, yeah, I believe the monitoring officer ruled on that it wasn't in order, and therefore the Constitution again refers to us to move on to the next item of business, which is question 3.
Question 3, please.
Okay, I wonder if this question will be avoided as well then. Can I ask the question on the order paper as printed?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think started up on the right one. Worcester City has placed both pub watch scheme and overseen by the police, and best part none except overseen by Worcester Bid and WRS.
Well, I'm not sure I actually had an answer to the question, Mr. Mayor, but I have spoken to many people who work and use the nighttime economy. They raise issues of concerns about pay, breaks, noise, racial, sexist and homophobic abuse, violence, safety in his home. Taxi drivers have also raised concerns about safety, abuse, drunkenness, and people refusing to pay their fares. So why is he reluctant to investigate these issues? Why is he reluctant to find solutions to these problems? Is he more concerned about preserving the profits of club and bar owners than the safety and welfare of the people who use their services or work for them?
Mr. Mayor, yes, as the former chair of the Environment and Health Committee, I'm sure he knows very well that all these things can be discussed and bring it for the committee. So look forward to the next committee then.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, the next question is from Councillor Collins, Councillor Stafford.
In July 2019, this council declared a climate emergency, and as a result, in February 2020, agreed a reserve budget of £100,000 for environmental sustainability. How much of that reserve fund remains available to be spent?
Councillor Stafford.
Thank you. In July 2020, the Environment Committee approved a spend of up to £7,000 from the budget for the feasibility study for a Worcester City heat network. However, this funding has not been required as the heat network delivery unit offered to fully fund the study. In July 2021, the Environment Committee approved a spend of £20,000 from this budget for the Environmental Community Grant Scheme. This scheme is to ensure they may spend the £20,000 by the end of March, with the potential for future requests for further funds from the budget if the scheme has been successful with good outcomes. In March 2021, the Environmental Sustainability Strategy Action Plan was agreed by the Environment Committee. This action plan contains a number of proposals which will need funding from the £100,000 budget. Examples include invest to save funding for decarbonisation of our office buildings, staff cycle storage, and associated facilities such as lockers, as well as biodiversity projects, including Lippard ponds and improvements on waterways. Meanwhile, the Council has focused work on the key priority area of domestic energy efficiency improvements through the Green Home Grant, of which the Council has secured just under 1.5 million towards energy efficiency improvements for households on low income in the city, on top of the 200,000 capital funding we received in phase 1A. A further bid for 800,000 to spend in 2022-2023 has been submitted as part of a consortium bid led by the Midlands Energy Hub. Other projects which deliver on the environmental sustainability strategy include the 400,000 nearly complete installation of rapid charge points in St Martin's Gate car park and the 4.5 million active travel allocated in the town's investment plan. We've also got allocations for battery powered equipment for use by staff in environmental operations and a winter tree planting programme.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mayor. And I thank the member for that answer. On the one hand, I'm pleased that we're spending that money prudently. On the other hand,
we've been too cautious in the face of the climate crisis. We're not acting with sufficient scale or urgency, and we're going no farther in the end, or barely any further or faster than national policy, despite having set ourselves higher goals. The trends are clear. Cities like Oxford and Manchester have led the way in active travel. We could have supported the County Council by commissioning a strategic plan for citywide walking and cycle networks. We already help people improve their homes to save energy, but only those in particular need. Research shows that local councils are trusted. We could have offered a home installation one-stop shop, providing advice and installation, making it easy for any resident to insulate their home, even if they rent. We should do these things now. Will the member join me in urgently pursuing these measures?
I'm happy to look at any proposals for use of the budget. I think the objective of the £100,000 was always to try and leverage it and use it to attract additional funding, and certainly that's where the focus has been, and it's been an incredibly successful result in the just nearly 2.5 million potential just on green home grants. The action plan that we have could easily spend that £100,000 budget many times over. So I think we do have to be prudent on how we do spend it and make sure it is on the most effective measures. But I'm always open, and the process through the Environment Committee is open for any suggestions or any ideas of how to make the most of that budget.
thank you very much. And the next question is from Councillor Olkoff.
Question number 5 on the order paper. As council, we are currently developing a quality action plan, which is 2021, and this will be reported to the Licensed Environment Committee in December.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Disser. The British Medical Journal recently published a study which concluded that prolonged exposure to pollutants, even at levels lower than the World Health Organization's guidelines, had a poor impact on all of our health. Does he agree with the former MP for Hexham, who claim that we have the right to choose which poisons to breathe? In which case, what about our residents' rights to choose the poisons they breathe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I pointed out, the last committee member he was on, and the answer that he asked, and I thought I'd given the accurate answer. But nevertheless, this government has, we're very gladly, has inflated £900 million for air quality grant, which we'll be sharing, and I'm developing it with the officers and the committee. We will further develop that, and that will be reported to the committee. I'm sure we'll be delighted to know.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. And again, question number 6 on the order paper.
no formal decision on this matter was made by any committee, to the best of my knowledge, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, do you have a comment or something?
I do, thank you again, Mr. Mayor. I refer back to my original question, which said that on the 21st of July, the Worcester News reported the leader of the council saying that a bid for City of Culture 2025 rather, was not being considered this time for similar reasons as the 2021 bid. In 2014, when this council decided to apply for 2021 City of Culture, the LLP, local business and cultural organisations were enthusiastic about the idea. In 2015, after a change in the balance of power of the council, disappointingly decided not to proceed with an application. Recently, Visit Worcester has announced a consultation inviting residents to contribute to a 5-year cultural strategy. Worcester is amongst the top 5 most cultural cities in the country, and during COVID, the High Street bucked the trend with regards to visitors. The Town Centre Fund and the Arches project will enhance the city, encouraging even more visitors. When I joined this council, both we of the council and the MD went to projects to show new members that allow all councillors to participate in the decision-making process. It is therefore disappointing that members first found out about this decision through the press. Given the government's commitment to Worcester, as well as the enthusiasm from the LEP and others back in 2014, is there any value in preparing now for a bid in 2025 for 2029?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we got a question in the end. There was no formal decision, and I'm a great advocate of the committee system. Of course, the Constitution enshrines the rights of the chairman and the vice chairman, who come from different parties under the Constitution, to put anything on the agenda. Had you wished, or your group wished, to put anything on the agenda, there was a meeting of the head committee on the 7th of June, which the put onto the agenda. To the best of my knowledge, I've spoken with the chairman, no such call was made. My personal view was asked by the Worcester News, and I did give it, that I didn't think, actually at that time, that given that we were in the middle of the vaccines programme and our COVID recovery, and we were preparing for the final submission of our Towns Fund, that the management capacity of this organisation was there to be able to prepare a successful and strong bid at this point. But, you know, you never say never in this game. So if councillors and this council resolves that it wants to bid in for the 2029 one, you should bring it through the committee system and ask the PED committee to look at it. We will, of course, then be armed with a cultural strategy, which was another reason that we weren't prepared at this point to put in a strong bid. That will be ready by the end of the year and will obviously put us in a better position.
Thank you. The next question is from Councillor Richard. Councillor
Question that's tabled, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have Worcester Regulatory Services to confirm there were 12 complaints made during this event taking place. And more to the point, the event was appropriately licensed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The event in question did divide opinion in St. John's. Many people enjoyed the music, and it could be heard all over St. John's, with many people complimenting the event and listening to the music in their back gardens. Others were not so happy, and they were upset, especially those who live close to New Road, like the residents who live in the high-rise flats in St. Clement's Close. They had no prior warning that the music would be so loud and so late. Can you ensure that the licence is reviewed and the cricket club receives advice about future events to ensure local residents are informed in advance and warned about any potential disturbance? And if the club could be given advice on ways to take measures to reduce the impact of any noise pollution at any future events?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. The next question is from Councillor Lamb to Councillor Mark Bailiff, Leader of the Council.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question to the Leader of the Council is, on the 15th of September, Parliament voted 253 votes for method and a non-binding Labour motion to cancel the £20 per week cut to universal credit due to take effect next month. One brave Tory rebel MP, Peter Aldous, warned, "We have a duty and a responsibility to protect those on the lowest incomes and the most vulnerable in society. All the evidence shows that a sudden reduction in income of this magnitude will hit a lot of people very hard." Despite even the government's own analysis showing the cut will not only hit the poorest in society, but also suck spending out of our hard-pressed local high streets, it is clear that they will be ignoring the vote. Can the Leader of the Council tell us how many people in Worcester will be worse off as a result of this cut?
The government introduced a temporary increase in the standard allowance of universal credit of £20 per week in March 2020. This allowance was extended for a further 6 months in April 2021 and is due to cease on the 6th of October. It is not possible from the data provided by DWP to determine how many of those are affected by the change in the calculation of universal credit payments, as this depends upon earnings and other deductions from the standard allowance.
Thank you. And then next question is also from Councillor Lamb to Councillor James Stanley. Oh, supplementary, yeah, sorry.
Thank you for that answer. I think I read in the Guardian today that nationally 800,000 people would be worse off across the country as a result of this. And what we have in Worcester is where people facing a brutal manner of this cut, rising food prices, rising fuel bills, and higher national insurance contributions. Now, the Leader of the Council may recall that when the Work and Pension Secretary, Therese Coffey, was asked how many hours the average universal credit recipient would need to work to make up the £20 a week cut, she said 2 hours. This completely incorrect response revealed a complete ignorance both of the system and of the impact on hard-working families. Boris Johnson refused to even answer the question when asked at Prime Minister's Question Time, and I suspect we know why. Now is the opportunity, Mr. Mayor, for the Tory party to get the answer right. Can the Leader of the Council tell us approximately how many hours a universal credit recipient in Worcester will need to work extra to compensate for this Tory cut, and whether he has any other bright ideas for the poorest in our city?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm not going to give him an answer of a number on the hoof, of course not. And again, he's not asked for that in the original question. But what I will tell him is that we debated this policy at length before the last election, when his party unfortunately lost seats and this party gained seats. But on this important issue, I think the government was right. The Conservative government was right to introduce this £20 rise. It was right to extend it for a further 6 months. And if I was the minister responsible for it, I'd consider extending it again at this point, because I think we are not out of the impact of COVID. We are seeing the impact of the universal credit and the impact on jobs continuing. So I would ask the government, and I have asked ministers to look again at this time. But that's just not good knockabout, I know, Matt, but I hope that you will appreciate it's a more sensitive answer.
Okay, and I'll ask Councillor Lamb to ask. Final question to Councillor James Stanley.
The Board of Inflation answers the question is 9 hours extra per week. Next question is to James Stanley, Chair of Communities. Will the Chair of Communities Committee join me in congratulating Emma Raducanu for her stunning victory in the US Open Tennis Championships? Her victory is an inspiration to us all and will hopefully serve in encouraging more people to take up the sport. What can be done in this city to help Worcester produce its own Emma in the future?
James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm grateful to Councillor Lamb for the question. I would certainly like to take the opportunity to join him in congratulating Emma Raducanu on her victory in the Open Tennis Championships. Members, I'm sure, will have had their own particular sporting heroes through childhood and indeed adulthood, inspirational figures whose exploits guide many to take up sport and fulfil their own potential, albeit usually at a level far below that of Emma Raducanu. I am confident that members will be pleased to learn that Freedom Leisure have been in close contact with the Lawn Tennis Association, and a number of significant initiatives have emerged from those discussions. The detail, I won't read out at length now, but I'm perfectly happy for officers to relay that information to members in the usual fashion. But suffice to say that there are opportunities now for women and girls and school children to take advantage of the facilities that we have available in Worcester. And I, for one, am really glad that that is the case. As an aside, members will be, I'm sure, delighted to discover that my colleague, Councillor Mitchell, working with Albury Park Primary, has used part of his own council award fund to offer children at the school free tennis camps during the school holidays. An initiative much more likely to result in children taking tennis to a higher level than, I would argue, indulging in a photo opportunity for your Twitter followers.
Thank you. Mentor, please.
Thank you for that response. It's good to hear a reference to free tennis, because one of the church ministries agree that the first step in encouraging tennis in the city is to widen the opportunity for free tennis, to ensure that the broadest range of people can access it, rich or poor, young or old, or indeed my good colleague, Councillor Richard Udall. At the moment, we have wonderful new courts in Cripplegate Park and St John's, which are clearly underused, with limited free tennis and a difficult booking system. Emma learnt to play on free public tennis court when she was 4. How would any 4-year-old girl in Worcester learn to play if she can't afford a place?
Thank you very much. Hold on,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Lamb.
I think, to just reiterate a couple of the points that I made in the initial response, there will be a number of opportunities, particularly for women and girls, to gain further experience and to play and be taught tennis as a result of the initiatives that are coming forward now, following the discussions between Freedom Leisure and the Lawn Tennis Association. He will be aware, as I'm sure everyone in this room is aware, that we have a commercial contract with Freedom Leisure that we're not at liberty to tweak halfway through or at any point until we get to the end of it. We have an obligation, a legal obligation to that contract, and we also have an obligation to those members who actually bought memberships. But as a principle, I am absolutely committed to the idea that a wider range of Worcester residents have the opportunity to learn and to enjoy tennis and use the facilities we have on offer.
Okay, thank you. Now that concludes the questions. We'll now go on to the item 7, which is the notice of motion. These notices are being submitted in accordance with Council Procedure Rule 8. The first one is on the council tax, which is proposed by Councillor Stephen and being seconded by Councillor Robinson. And I've also been given notice that Councillor William and Councillor all wish to speak on this. So if anybody else wants to make their point known, they will also be added to their speakers. So I've got Councillor Bayliss. Any others? Udall. And yeah, Chabba, yeah, I've got you as well. So what we'll do is I'll ask Councillor Stephen to propose the motion.
The first principle of a sustainable economy is that the polluter pays. A carbon tax is a charge applied to products based on the fossil fuel emissions created. And following the principle of the polluter pays, carbon tax ensures businesses and individuals who create the most pollution pay for the damage that they cause. We propose to apply a carbon tax on goods made in the UK, as well as on goods coming into this country, so that we create a level playing field for both goods created in the UK. How will this apply to us as individuals within here in Worcester? How will it affect our purchasing decisions? So for example, when we're choosing how to heat our homes, we have a choice. Will we choose to use gas to heat our homes, or will we choose to invest in something like a heat pump? Or will we choose to use a low or a zero carbon tariff electricity supplier? If we want to travel to Edinburgh, will we choose to go by train, perhaps an electric train, or will we choose to travel by aircraft? And when we are eating food, will we choose to eat food that is locally sourced and season? Or will we choose to eat food that is perhaps been grown in a heated greenhouse or flown from many miles away from far-flung places around the world? And in each of these examples, the costs of pollution today are currently externalized. We do not pay for those costs of pollution. With a carbon tax, we actually see and we pay for the pollution that we create as individuals. 6 years ago in Paris, we had a 2015 Paris Agreement. And in that, governments from around the world decided together that they would limit the rise in temperature of the planet to within 2 degrees centigrade and strive best efforts to get to 1.5 degrees centigrade. But unfortunately, the United Nations' most recent report tells us that we are not on track. We are not going to hit those targets that have been set as legally binding targets in Paris. And yet we've seen the Australian bushfires that have created so much devastation and caused many people's lives to be lost in their homes and businesses. We've seen the Californian forest fires as well, again, that people have lost their homes and lost their lives. And most recently, we've seen catastrophic floods across Central Europe, again, close to home where people have been devastated with their losses. Now, the government claims that they are world leading on climate change. And I would accept that in terms of electricity generation, that is a very good starting point. Unfortunately, though, we are not on track on many other sectors of our economy. We're not on track to hit our targets on transport. We're not on track to hit our targets on home heating. And we're not on track to hit our targets on food production. But it's even worse than that, because we don't know that all of the carbon that we actually produce goes in society. Currently, the government does not track or have any plans to reduce the amount of carbon that's been produced by air travel coming in and out of our country. We conveniently miss out all the carbon that's produced in shipping that goes around the world. And most worryingly, we choose to not count the millions of tons of carbon that is exported into our country through embedded carbon in all the millions of tons of products which are basically imported into this country. The carbon tax does two things. It reduces the demand for the things that produce carbon dioxide. But the second thing it does is it provides the money that we need to invest in our shared green and sustainable future. Without that money, how are we going to invest in the future? We need money to decarbonize transport. We need money to invest in home insulation and greening our home heating. We need money to invest properly in food production. And as we've seen recently, the last few days, we need a significant amount of money to invest in heavy users of energy, things like cement, steel, and fertilizers. Let's combine those two problems, then we're all in trouble. Carbon tax pushes individuals and companies to minimize carbon emissions, and that is a good thing. But there is also a business imperative as well. And that is, it also creates a positive stimulus and it creates measures that encourage low carbon industry. And we will put a massive impetus and a positive impetus on those businesses that we have in the UK. We're an engineering nation. and we should be supporting those fledgling businesses that are in a low carbon economy. Often when people talk about carbon taxes, they worry about things like recession. And obviously, without having some sort of mechanism, what we could face is we could face a problem where our jobs are being exported abroad. If this motion calls for not only a carbon tax on our own UK production, but also a carbon tax, a sort of carbon tax adjustment on imports that come into the UK. And this is a really critical, important part of the motion, because what it does, it creates a level playing field so that we cannot have cheap imports coming in and undercutting our businesses with low carbon, with products that are being made with carbon. And the important part of this motion also says that what we need to do is to make sure that we only levy this additional carbon import tax on items which have not already had a carbon tax imposed on them by their own countries. So what will happen is that we will be actually receiving the carbon tax into our UK coffers, into our tax system. And very quickly, exporting businesses will learn that in order to save money for themselves and to put the tax into their own tax system, if they impose their own tax, their own carbon tax, then that will be a positive way for them to be able to retain the money in their own country. And over time, what will happen is we will be exporting the benefits of carbon tax, because all of the other countries will gradually need to introduce their own carbon tax in order to not pay our carbon. The other critical thing that many people will say about carbon tax is that it will hit the least able to afford the carbon tax. But of course, no policy is in Ireland just by itself. Low-income families often have poorest accommodation, often have cars that are not the most efficient because they cannot afford to buy an up-to-date car, perhaps. The carbon tax, what it can do is that we can use some of the money for a carbon tax dividend. And this is something that we can pay back into the economy so that everyone has an opportunity to pay for the carbon tax. So we're taking with one hand and giving back with the other. So the Green Party would advocate using a non-means tested universal basic income. So everyone by right in this country would receive the basic income to be paid by this carbon tax. And this would put the money back into people's pockets to be able to pay for the increases in the carbon. Of course, if you don't support a universal basic income, then there are other mechanisms available and you can use the current tax and benefit system. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. People on both the right and left of politics are coming round to the need for a carbon tax. Many people are subscribing to the principle of the polluter pays. I'm just going to share 3 examples of prominent figures who support the carbon tax. Erin O'Toole, in 2021, Conservative Party of Canada leader Erin O'Toole became the first leader of the Canadian Federal Conservative Party to endorse carbon pricing. In his climate plan, he recognised that the most efficient way to reduce our emissions is to use pricing mechanisms. A second quote, International Monetary Fund Managing Director Councillor Mel Olkoff said, "We also need much greater efforts to reduce carbon emissions and offset that cannot be reduced. The best way forward is to put a price on carbon." And finally, former Republican Secretaries of State James Baker and George Shultz said, "Long preferred by economists and business leaders, a well-designed and gradually rising carbon fee is the most cost-effective climate solution." So, on that basis, I urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
Okay. I will ask Councillor Bayless first of all to speak, and then the other speakers who've raised their hands, I will then call in turn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you. And I want to thank Councillor Stephen and Lawrence for raising this issue. I acknowledge that there are very laudable aims in doing so. I am just afraid I don't agree with this, that this is the policy instrument to achieve those aims. There are a number of reasons why I disagree with this. I mean, mostly that it's regressive, that those who, you know, the people on the lowest incomes tend to spend the most of their income on transport, and therefore the burden would fall more heavily on them than on the well-heeled. People on low incomes also spend more of their income on heating, on electricity and fuel than the rich do. They also spend, the poor also, and those on medium and lower earnings also tend to spend more of their money on food than the rich do. And the food, the big, you know, wheat and corn are big users of fertilizers of fossil fuels. So there's an immediate inflationary impact on all of those products of a carbon tax. So it's regressive, is my first argument against it. I think the issues that has for the hard-working families of Worcester, for instance, this would be seen as yet another tax being imposed upon them. Certainly something that is unwanted at this particular time, when social care costs are going to increase, when energy prices appear to be rising. You know, there are issues already for people in terms of their incomes. I think the carbon tax, particularly the motion calls for the government to introduce it by the end of 2022. That's a phenomenally quick time in terms of redesigning a complete tax system. And I have a lot of issues with his proposed redistribution mechanism. Universal basic income, I think, it has many weaknesses and issues to do with that we probably don't have time to engage in tonight. But I think that is not a method of redistributing that counters this policy. I think prices are also inelastic in some areas. People, particularly in rural areas, can't, you know, just because you put the tax on they can't. They've still got to go shopping. They've still got to pick the kids up. All of those things, they'll just have to pay the extra cost of doing so. And you know, yes, you're absolutely right. There are some people on the political right who thinks the polluter pays principle ought to be always triumph there, and I disagree with them. I've spoken about what I think would be the big inflationary impact of a carbon tax, and the final serious reason I will oppose this motion tonight is the impact on international trade. You do make reference in the motion calling for the COP26 international agreement on that. Highly unlikely in the carbon tax era that this would be agreed this year and they're implemented thereafter. What you don't seem to acknowledge is that exports, you talk about how you would impose it on imports. What are you going to do about those businesses in Worcester who export to other countries that don't have a carbon tax? Suddenly, they're totally uncompetitive because they're paying for this carbon tax that other suppliers in Germany or in Bolivia or wherever, in Australia and elsewhere, are not paying. And so, you know, you at a stroke, you make British exports 20% or whatever it is, the carbon tax rate would be more less competitive. And so, for those reasons, their impact on jobs, their impact on inflation, and their disproportional impact on the poorest in society, I don't think this is the right way forward. I'm quite happy to work with anybody actually on what are the right ways forward. But as I said at the start, I acknowledge the totally laudable aims of the mover in trying to address the huge climate challenge we face. But I don't believe this is the right policy at this time.
Okay, can I have on my list of speakers, I'm going to go in the order that I've actually received them. So first of all, Councillor Marjorie Bissett. Are you ready to stand up? Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realise that I was on the list.
You're on the list, yes.
Yes.
If you
Can
don't
you
want
come-
to speak, fine, I can move on to the next speaker.
Please can you go on to the next speaker?
Can I have the
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to address the issue, Councillor Bayliss, with the taxes being applied to and restricting our national productivity and exports. Because the principle is that if you import or produce a home good that has little embodied carbon, then you won't actually increase the cost of it. So in that way, you're encouraging goods to have less carbon in them, which is where we want to be. And instead, the things that are more expensive become less attractive. Yeah, well, it's the same principle, isn't it? So when you export something, it's a being applied, you're talking about adapting to business, and actually the really wants is British business by British goods as well, you know.
Okay, next speaker is Councillor Mel Olkoff, please.
Mayor, thank you. Yeah, I would like to support this motion. I mean, obviously today we all look around, we're obviously very concerned, if not for ourselves, about others, I would hope, about the rising costs. We have concerns around gas supply and rising costs. How many of us in this country now wish that we had more renewables? We can talk about how we really need to do something about this. I think if we think back to the Paris Agreement, part of the success of this agreement was the time, the planning and the preparation that went into it. And already today, the BBC have reported concerns around COP26 that the current government are not spending the time or putting the attention and level of detail that they need to make COP26 work. To my mind, with the current Prime Minister, I think that, you know, he's not leading a strong enough strategy. And that, you know, so there are definite issues there. And I guess, sorry, just bear with me, my handwriting is awful. It's, yeah, so I think, you know, this evening, you know, Councillor Stephen is just asking the managing director to write a letter. We all know the reality of the letter, not all that will look into it, action. But I think we just need to make a stand. And I think Councillor Stephen is just asking for a letter. Let's please just do something proactive from where we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your contribution. I will now call Councillor Richard Udall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the Labour Group would be very sympathetic to this motion, but we believe it's been tabled at the wrong time and the wrong place. And the cost to the consumer of a carbon tax would be devastating at this time in our history. A time when national insurance is going up, universal benefit is being cut, food prices are going up, energy prices are going up, inflation is up, an economic mess created in Downing Street, and now you're asking for a carbon tax on top. Clearly, as others have indicated, a carbon tax doesn't always work. Industry will have the choice between absorbing the tax or passing it on. If they pass it on, the people who will pay the most will be the poor. And there are also perverse incentives here. The incentive, Councillor Stevens mentioned the possibility of a carbon tax dividend. Well, surely that would only happen and could only work if the carbon tax did not work and did not reduce emissions. In order to get that dividend, you have to have a little tax income. And the comments about buying British goods, surely that's also an issue which concerns me greatly about protectionism. It would be disastrous for exporters seeking trade with the West from developing countries, especially fair trade exporters, and we need to prevent that from happening. Even though I can understand and sympathise with the reasons for this notice of motion, I work on the basis of the famous Honour and Bevan quote on most things which I determine my view upon, but not even the enlightened principle of the greatest good for the greatest number can excuse indifference to individual suffering. If this motion is passed and agreed by government, it would create individual suffering amongst the poorest in British society. For that reason and for that reason alone, I shall be abstaining.
Thank you. And the next is Councillor Riyad.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is another tax that will inevitably tax the poorest in society. We all know, Mr. Mayor, that if implemented, it will be absorbed by businesses that have been hardest hit and will simply be passed on to the consumer. And worst of all, Mr. Mayor, it will hit the small independent businesses like breweries, pubs, and food manufacturers that have been the very ones that have been suffering immensely over the past pandemic and struggling to stay above the water. Recent energy price hikes, the lorry driver shortage, the CO2 crisis, which I'm very much involved in on the front line, seeing everyday small businesses fighting for their lives because of the uncertainty of supply, the uncertainty of energy supplies has shown us the vulnerability of our economy. What we don't need is another tax, Mr. Mayor, that will be the death knell for small business and small industry. This obsessiveness must stop before it goes too far. The carbon tax is yet another example of an insensitive policy at a highly sensitive time that has been brought forward that will punish the poor and the small businesses and the ones that are sacrificing them all. And from that, Mr. Mayor,
Councillor Stevens, who has exercised his right to reply.
Okay, so just to respond to some of those points made, an accusation has been made that it's a tax at the wrong time. When is the right time? We're now 6 years since Paris. We're already failing, and the time is now to take climate change seriously. We need to invest something like £100 billion every single year to hit our target of doubling to carbon neutral by 2030. For us, carbon neutral by 2030 isn't something we just say on paper. We have policies that we need to be able to back that up, and that means massive investment. That investment needs to come from somewhere, and one of the ways it can come from is from a carbon tax. Some points being raised about those most at need who are least able to pay. One of the purposes of doing a carbon tax is one, to change behaviours, but the second reason is to massively invest in all of the homes in the UK, to insulate every single home, to provide a massive stimulus for investment in public transport, to invest the technology and the engineers to be able to look at things like how we produce fertilizers and steel and cement, and the really big energy users of things like gas, and how we can decarbonize those things. We need masses of investment to do that. If not now, when would we do it? The point has been raised about the World Trade Organization and about whether this is legal to do. It is legal to do. It's one of the people that I've been researching is a chap called Professor Dieter Helm. He's a professor of economics at Oxford University. And what he says is that WTO rules do in fact allow for environmental adjustments. And so the border tax on carbon tied to an explicit environmental benefit and applied on the same basis domestically. I re-emphasize that there is a growing consensus that we need to act. The climate change emergency is serious, it's man-made, and it's immediate. There is a growing consensus that we need to have the polluter pays principle. Imposing an import duty adjustment on all imported goods will level the playing field. And in answer to the export question, one of the important things is that we need to rebalance our economy from producing consumable items that should be bought on credit, less durable items, and actually to test their economy to one that actually invest massively in the green new deal. And the green new deal
will invest in all of the infrastructure we need in this country. And that's where we'll produce hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs, good quality jobs, doing the things we need to do to get to carbon neutral and to create the green economy. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, we've had quite a debate there. So I'm now going to hand over to Claire, who will explain the voting arrangement.
No vote, please. Point of order, no vote, please.
Yeah. Okay, vote.
If you're voting for the motion, against or abstaining when I call your name. Thank you. Councillor Agar. Abstain. Councillor Olkoff. For. Councillor Alan Amos. Councillor Bill Amos. Councillor Barnes. Abstain. Councillor Bayliss. Councillor Bissett. Councillor Carver. Councillor Cleary. Councillor Collins. Councillor Crowe.
Abstain.
Councillor Denham. Abstain. Councillor Ditter. Councillor Geraghty. Councillor Gregson. Councillor Griffiths. Sorry, apologies. Councillor Hassan. Councillor Hodges. Abstain. Councillor Mrs. Lucy Hodgson. Against. Councillor Stephen Hodgson.
Against.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Lamb. Councillor Manson. Councillor Lawrence. 4. Councillor Lewing. 4. Councillor McKay. Councillor Mitchell.
Against.
Councillor Norfolk.
Abstain.
Councillor Riaz. Councillor Roberts. Councillor Stafford. Councillor Stanley. Councillor Stephen.
4.
Councillor Udall.
Abstain.
Thank you. The motion is left, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the second motion, which is entitled A Greener and More Pleasant City, which is proposed by Councillor Louis, seconded by Councillor Bishop, and we've also got Councillor Stephen expressing an interest to speak. So do we have any others? Yes, Councillor Stafford. Just bear with me while I write these down, because I'm not using my pen, and the nib's not suited for left-handed writers. Anybody else? Proposing, I will then invite Councillor Louis to propose the motion.
Thank you, Mayor. The people of Worcester want to live in neighbourhoods that are litter-free. Clean public spaces can stimulate economic investment, tourism, and attract people to a community to live, work, and socialise. The amount of litter in the city annoys residents and visitors and places a significant burden on the council. And the current bin review is very welcome, but it does not go far enough. With an increase in the amount of food and drink being consumed on the go, there is an increasing amount of packaging being dropped on our streets, and it is often concentrated in hotspots near where the item was purchased. The government's litter strategy advocates that to tackle this, councils need to influence behaviour and work alongside businesses of all kinds. So other councils have adopted various strategies to reduce littering that have met with a fair degree of success. In Kent, under a voluntary code, local businesses undertake to keep the area around their premises free of litter and display anti-littering posters. In Essex, all 14 authorities have taken part in a collaborative Love Essex campaign involving the police, councils, and McDonald's, Coca-Cola and Domino's, aimed at making it socially unacceptable to drop litter and this has resulted in a 41% drop in fast food littering. The Love Clean Streets app was developed by Lewisham and allows people to really easily report rubbish. It has improved cleanup rates to environmental problems whilst reducing the cost of reporting to council. And Rochford Council have developed Bin It for Good, where people are encouraged to use the bins by linking the amount collected with donations to local charities. Therefore, this motion proposes that officers explore and recommend options for consideration by the Council's Environment Committee for a new collaborative strategy that will encourage the use of the new bins. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And having that speech relatively short. Next, can I ask Councillor Bissett to second the motion, please?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really pleased to see my colleague bring this motion forward, and also to read about the innovative ideas of other councils in tackling the litter problem. Street cleaning across this country, and when I say street cleaning, I don't just mean washing the streets, I mean removing litter. Street cleaning is thought across this country something like £1 billion a year, and I'm sure the costs of doing this in Worcester are pretty high. We've got a real problem with litter in this city, and it's quite clear as you go around the city that it varies from one area to another. I think we should expect businesses such as fast food outlets that create much of the litter we see, to bear responsibility for what happens to the food we consume. And I'd also like to point out that several of the examples Karen mentioned involve working across a number of councils, and I think that's something else that we could explore. And I'm very happy to second this motion.
Thank you very much. I will now invite Councillor Stafford to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I absolutely support any good idea that will help make Worcester a cleaner and more pleasant city. That is certainly what the Environment Committee has been working towards over recent years. I'm not sure why this needed to be a motion for the council, Shirley and Mel, myself, or Tom, or officers that have sufficed, where it could have been raised at Environment Committee. For a party that championed the committee system, the Greens do seem to want to circumvent it a lot. The motion states that the current bin review does not go far enough. However, we are doing a lot more than just a bin review. The overall bin strategy is a substantial investment programme in new, bigger and better bins. The investment has already led to the installation of new bins across the city, including recycling bins, so residents can now recycle at home and when they are on the go. The bin strategy will also substantially increase bin capacity across the city. The sight of overflowing bins is not a good one and does not encourage good behaviour.
When this Conservative group took control of St Councillor Mel,
we invested no time in allocating resources to improve the cleanliness and attractiveness of the city, including the creation of a city centre hit squad cleaning crew to rapidly react to issues as they arise and to provide additional city centre and riverside pavement washing. We've deployed an additional street scrubber for the city centre. There is additional cleaning resource for the riverside to empty bins more frequently and litter pick. There are additional cleaning rounds of pavement sweepers. There are extra resources to maintain and enhance our premier parks. To brighten up the city centre, we've installed dozens of hanging baskets, as well as the tree art butterflies and bunting, which doubles as a seagull deterrent. Talking of gulls, we've doubled the budget, so as well as increased egg removal, we've also had a hawk flying in the city centre at 8 hours a day. Outside of the centre, we've reintroduced a Saturday skip service to help reduce fly tipping. Real concrete action, I hope everyone agrees. So in conclusion, I support this motion, but remember, while this is happening, we will continue to deliver real action for the residents of Worcester to keep our streets and city centre clean.
I will now invite Councillor Stephen to the microphone.
litter that's left on the floor, on the pavement, to litter. So anything we can do that will clean up our streets will obviously help to improve our local environment. And why should we as a council, and why should local council taxpayers have to pay for the rubbish that other people throw on the floor? And I think this is a very good initiative, because what it does is it encourages local businesses to play their part and to be partners with the local council and to take the initiative to help to pick up the rubbish in their local area that's been created around their area. And if they can help us to do that, it will be good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There being no further requests to speak in this debate, I will ask Councillor Mel.
Thank you, Mayor. It is the government's own litter strategy that recommends that there is some behavioural element to picking up litter, and they have found that it's actually a lot of peer pressure that works. So that if young people think that littering is uncool, that is actually quite a good thing for us as a city. I'm a Duckworth Trust litter picker. The Duckworth Trust have got over 300 in the city. I don't think we quite realise how many people are going around picking up litter. And sometimes when I speak to somebody about how much litter I picked up on my road, and they discover that it's actually been mispicked between the times that I've done it and two other people are doing it as well. So it makes you realise that actually without those people who do a great job, we would actually have a much bigger problem. But really, we want the problem to go away. The impact of litter on wildlife is another consideration. You know, it gets into our water streams, it goes around ducks' necks, dogs eat it, it's a real issue. So if we can make our city cleaner, I think, you know, it would be fantastic for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move this to the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All those voting for the motion, please raise your hand. The motion is carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. And the final of the trio of motions is on Health and Wellbeing Committee. I've got a proposer from Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Johnson. And can anybody raise a hand if they also want to speak on this particular motion? Okay, in that case, then I will invite Councillor Mitchell to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given the recent constitutional changes approved by Council in May, and specifically the creation of a new Health and Wellbeing Committee, it is proposed that Council agree that issues relating to the implementation of Child Poverty Working Group recommendations and the budget be referred to the Health and Wellbeing Committee, and that Council notes and agrees the issues including, but not limited to, outreach services, drug and alcohol counselling, and mental health and well-being relating to the health and well-being of the homeless also fall within the scope of the Health and Wellbeing Committee. The monitoring officer is authorised to amend the responsibility for functions, Part 3 of the Constitution, to clarify these items as being within the remit of the Health and Wellbeing Committee. I think the motion is pretty self-explanatory. It's a process activity. I don't intend to talk to any great length on it, and I'll now take my seat.
Okay, does anybody else want to make any comments on this? In that case, then we'll move this to the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All those voting for the motion, please raise your hand. Thank you. The motion is carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 8.2, which are the first of our referral reports. So the first one is from Policy and Resource Committee on Member Champions, which is proposed by Councillor Bayliss, seconded by Councillor Gregson. I understand Councillor Bayliss said she wants to speak as well on this motion. So Councillor Bayliss.
Mr. Mayor, I think you might have missed one. 8.1, Councillor Hodgson might want to catch your eye, sir.
Oh dear, I'll get told off for that one. Okay then. Okay, our first referral report, mind you, really doesn't matter which way we do it round, does it really? But yes, we'll do this one first, 8.1 first. So this is the one on the local, on the place and local economic, place and economic development. Local development scheme 2021-24. So I'll ask Lucy Hodgson to propose it. We've got Councillor Hodgson seconded, and we've got Councillor Olkoff also wishing to speak as well. So anybody else wants to speak on this? So Councillor Lucy Hodgson, can you move the motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There might be a bit of cake for you later. So, the recommendations that are put forward are that that Council approve the local development scheme 2021 to 2024 set out in Appendix A, and for the LSD to come into effect from 1st of October 2021, and also that delegated authority is given to the Corporate Director, Planning and Governance, along with consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Place and Economic Committee to make minor amendments to the LSD prior to publication. So this agenda item relates to the local development scheme, which is required of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 as amended. And the LSD is two main purposes: to inform the public about the preparation and adoption of planning documents, and to establish and reflect council priorities and enable work programmes to be set for the preparation of the documents. It's considered good practice to update the LSD annually, and for the report procedures, a work programme on a 3-year cycle. And this LSD provides update is one is the SWDP review development plan scheme, the Travellers and Travelling Show People's DPD, neighbourhood planning in South Worcestershire, Worcestershire county matters such as the mineral and waste planning, and the statement of community involvement. The current iteration of the LSD schedules the next stage of the SWDP review, i.e. Regulation 19 for October, November 21. However, it's no longer possible due to key evidence-based updates relating to infrastructure and availability remaining outstanding and requiring further time to complete. An updated timetable factors into the time needed to carry out this work, and reflects and provides allowances to purge period for the Worcester City local elections in 2022. The updated SWDP timetable is set out in the committee papers in 3.5, with adoption of the revised plan in October 2023. Travellers and Travelling People, Show People, SDP. This is also updated for the timetable for the Travellers and Travelling People, SPD, and it is being prepared to support policy number SWDP 17 in the adoption SWDP, and is not dependent on the SWDP review, and the revised timetable will also not be effective by the 2022 Worcester City period, and the the revised Traveller DPD is set out in committee paper 5.5, and adoption will be in July 2023. And there are also other updates. So we have updates to the statement of community involvement and the removal of the temporary COVID-19 procedures, updates relating to the neighbourhood planning in South Worcestershire, and updates to Worcestershire County Council reserve matters and waste. So it just leaves me with the two recommendations: that the council approves the LSD scheme and that delegated authority is given to the corporate director planning, along with the vice chair and vice chair of the place and economic subcommittee or committee. Okay.
Thank you very much for that. Can I ask Councillor Joe Hodges to second?
Thank you. I'll formally second. Approval of the LDS and the delegated authority to make minor amendments. It's been thoroughly debated. It's been very thoroughly explained to you by the chair of that committee. So I'll reserve my right to speak later should I need to.
I've got Councillor Mel Olkoff down to speak, so I invite you to the microphone.
Mayor, thank you. Yeah, I would just like to comment. Obviously, there's been a lot of procedure around this and a lot of work, so I won't detain anyone any longer. Just with regards to the South people here, remember the South Worcestershire Development Plan, that's the reference to Worcester, Avon and Malvern. But I think one thing of concern with the delay, obviously the public are going to be kept in the dark for longer about what will be happening in their area. So just to mention that, we'll be working with SWDP and then hopefully to move something forward to Worcester to make sure the residents of Worcester are more aware of what's happening for them in the future in terms of planning. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no further speakers, can I ask Councillor Thompson if you want to exercise the right to reply?
Members within the Worcester City will be working towards it. It's not just you in particular, we really have. It is, and it really is the Worcester element that we need to work to, and we just need to remember that. So I commend that to council.
Thank you very much. Can we now move this to the vote, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All those voting for the motion, please raise your hand. The motion is carried, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. And now I will call 8.2, the referral report from PNR on member champion. So I ask Councillor Bailey to propose, Councillor Adrian Gregg to second. I know Councillor Barnes also wishes to speak as well. Any other people want to speak on this matter? Okay, right, Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report has been to Policy and Resources Committee and was unanimously agreed and brought forward. The report sets out the role of member champions in the council, the way in which they are appointed and reappointed if that is wished, eligibility to serve, and importantly, the point about reporting of the work of champions to this council for their activities. So I think the report is a broad agreement, and I hope the council will support it tonight.
Thank you very much, and Councillor Adrian Gregson.
Thanks, Mayor. Yes, the leader has summed it up adequately. I think the importance of this is that we have had member champions for some considerable time without really knowing how accountable or how useful they've been, and this is certainly a step in the right direction. There may be some issues that we need to look at in the future as a result of our experience, but I believe this is the right way forward at the moment.
Thank you very much, and I'll invite Councillor Barnes.
Especially the idea that we'll have a single point of contact for some of these areas, and residents will be able to get in touch with somebody who they elect, and I think that's a really positive way forward. I would like to ask about the financial resources that champions can call on. Which committee or committees have oversight of the activities, and how would any expenditure appear on the annual accounts for scrutiny?
And there be no further
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As for budgets, I think there is only one, to the best of my knowledge, which is Armed Forces, which was, I think we agreed £5,000. It was a matter debated by council. It is in the budget. It's the way in which that money is spent is agreed in consultation with the Section 151 officer to make sure that it's appropriate. I think we spend a lot more money in other ways. So I think in terms of, but any member may of course discuss something at audit committee, and of course they might also discuss the appropriate committee system. So no problem with that. I'm sure everybody's totally open and transparent about how public money is spent. So I don't see a problem with that. But hopefully with that assurance, we will get broad support for this clarity.
Thank you very much. I will now ask Claire to put this to the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Please raise your hand if you're voting for the motion. Thank you. The motion is carried, Mr. Mayor.
Any matters that is the opinion require urgent consideration by the council?
No such matters, Mr. Mayor.
And I'm not aware of any notice of exec items. So on that basis, the business has been concluded for this meeting, and I would like to thank the council for getting this completed by 9 o'clock. I'm sure the photographer will be delighted, and I'm sure the prospect of liquid refreshment will encourage everyone to get this meeting finished in a timely fashion. So thank you very much.